Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Student Association for Fire Ecology Connections Hereafter Safe webinar series. My name is Badri Gimiri. I am a PhD student at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, where I study plant-fire interaction. I am also a member of the National Safe Leadership Team who assisted with planning this webinar series, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Our intent for these webinars is to create a forum for students and early career fire ecologists to hear from and engage with diverse group of established professionals. Before introducing today's speaker, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on SAFE website following Dr. Fuller's presentation. We will have time for Q&A. Please feel free to add any questions you have to chat throughout the presentation. At the end, I will be moderating these questions and discussion at the end. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Kate Fuller. Dr. Fuller is a wildfire modeler at First Street, a public benefit company dedicated to quantifying climate risk at the property level. Dr. Fuller earned her master's degree from Auburn University and completed her PhD at Western Sydney University in Australia. Following her PhD, Dr. Fuller worked for about 2 years at Rocky Mountain Research Station's Missoula Fire Science Lab. Her work spans a wide range of areas, including biogeography, drought and fire behavior, vegetation management, ecological modeling, statistical computing, machine learning, data management, and science communication. I would like to add a quick info in here. I request you to mute your speaker and turn off your camera while Dr. Fuller is presenting. At the end, you can turn off your camera, unmute yourself if you want to ask question, or use chat box, which is also fine. Now I'm excited to hand this floor over to Dr. Fuller for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Badri. I'm really excited to share. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Okay. Yeah, I had a few things to say and Badri covered them. Thank you for the intro. I am a wildfire modeler at First Street, and I'm going to be presenting on our fire risk model for Canada, which was definitely a group effort, definitely a lot of people involved in this project. My background includes analysis of how fire and forest structure influence each other to create coupled fire and forest structure syndromes that feed back on each other, how these syndromes form and how they're disrupted by disturbances. I have a background in moss ecology, which, believe it or not, was part of this project, and I'm going to get into the details. All of that was really useful as a preparation for doing this work. And I want to start off by showing you in reverse, showing you the results first. So this is our model. We developed the Canadian model with our US model in mind. So the US model has already been released, and it was developed by our friends at Pyrogens, who did this phenomenal job of putting down the foundation for this process. We definitely, there's no question, we took cues from how they approached our US product. And our goal for the first version of Canada, which this is, was to try to match as close as possible the methods and the underlying data products and the eventual result. Our eventual result, which is burn probability, was our target here for any calibration we did during this process. And to me, the risk looks higher than I would have thought for Canada. I've learned a lot about this, the risk in these latitudes. You can see a lot in the mid-latitude especially, and I'll get into why that is in this talk as well. I certainly wouldn't say that this process was easy to implement in the US, but it was certainly more straightforward than in Canada. We're quite privileged in the US to have a richness of information about fire that's freely available, that's just not available outside the US. Canada included. And so there were some serious limitations to getting started, which was a big part of the work that we did. Um, oh, yeah, I did want to say a couple more things before I launch into the details. Um, we know that fire modeling is important. I'm not going to harp on that too much with this group, but I do want to mention that the what we've done here, process modeling at the scale that we did, has not been done before in Canada. And so this is a novel product. The fuelscape that we developed for doing the process modeling we did was also novel at 30-meter resolution. And we're going to be improving moving forward. So this is version one. Someone asked in the questions if this was proprietary. It is proprietary, but we do put out reports that are freely available if you want to look at the website, First Street's website. Okay, now to get into the details. We used Fire for process modeling. This is an open source data packet or a modeling package that was created by Chris Lautenberger. It is a process where it implements the Rothermel-based surface fire spread models in addition to passive and active crown fires, as well as ember lofting and spotting. And the basic inputs are ignitions, meteorology, fuels, and topography. For Fire to create a risk map in the end, we have to run this a bunch of times. We just run it in a Monte Carlo style modeling approach where we simulated 50,000 years of potential fire, which amounted to 390 million fires total that we burned in simulated fires in Canada. In order to do each one of these simulations, we take the ignition time and location, we sample the meteorology, and then we simulate a fire until the fire extinguishes or reaches its fire max duration. And the weather data came directly from historical records. But the other part, this fire max duration and ignition time and location, is something we have to give Fire in order to generate the risk maps. And this isn't just a given, it has to be done in a careful and thoughtful way. The reason for that is that what we want to do as a philosophy for our approach is to balance the statistics inputs to the model with the physics-based outputs. If we shoehorn our ignition time and location and durations to get these fires, we're going to end up just replicating what fires we have in the fire history. It's not going to look any different. We're not going to have any potential fire locations. And what we want to do is calculate the current risk and then extrapolate into future climates using CMIP6 models. So the process modeling aspect of it allows us to do that extrapolation. And we have to allow it to be flexible enough to do that, to capture the meteorology signal sufficiently to give us the actual risk current and then be able to change the risk using meteorology into the future and capture future risk. And we do that by making our statistical inputs flexible. We add noise in order to provide the uncertainty required for the physics-based models to come in and provide a larger signal in the product. And that's the general philosophy of how we did this. I'm going to go into more details in a moment. But I did want to touch on that before we get too far. And most of this talk is going to focus on the fuels, but I do need to go into how this was all done first, and then I'm going to talk about the fun stuff, the ecology. So ignitions, this was our first real challenge in Canada. Because, well, it's true everywhere. You don't really know where ignitions are on the landscape. It's impossible to track that in reality. And so what we have to use is fire records. These are the fire records across Canada that we have from the Canadian National Fire Database, and we filter out the fires that aren't relevant or aren't geolocated correctly or enough for us to trust. And then in order to have this flexibility that I talked about, we did Gaussian kernel density estimation at 12-kilometer grid, at a 12-kilometer grid level. And that 12-kilometer grid just generalizes across that 12 kilometers so that fires can occur anywhere in that 12-kilometer grid instead of pinpointing a fire from where it occurred before. And it just lets us generalize across the landscape more, but keeping the climate and fuels and weather in mind. And then we add a background level of ignitions all across Canada so that fires can occur anywhere that we're modeling. We do exclude the far northern reaches because they don't support fire, but within places that are vegetated, we did add ignitions across the board for that flexibility that I mentioned. So that's the ignition spatial distribution. Then we have duration and timing, and this is also not uniform. Ignitions don't happen everywhere all the time, and so we have to make sure we're capturing that in a way that makes sense. We used the Canadian National Fire Database again, which does not include fire durations. It just has fire sizes. So we had to work backwards from fire size. And we did this at the EPA level 2 ecoregion level. So these ecoregions are partly defined by their fire regime. And so we assume that they're going to have a similar distribution of fire sizes across the ecoregion. And build this distribution from observed fire sizes and number of fires. And then in order to get durations, we generate a random distribution of rate of spread values that are plausible in Canada, given observations. And we sample from the rate of spread distribution and we sample from the fire size distribution and we put it into a duration calculation, just assuming that the fire spreads outward as a circle, which fires don't spread outward as a circle, but it is a basic estimate for duration. Again, flexibility and uncertainty isn't a bad thing in this situation. We want it to be jittered a little bit, and so some jitter is okay in this as a result of this approximation. This gives us a duration distribution for each ecosystem, and we sample from that, and we merge that with our ignition density spatial distribution from the kernel density estimation, and generate a bunch of fires. And we look at what the resulting fire sizes are from our simulations. And then we tweak all of those variables until we get a distribution from our simulated fires that approximates the observed. This was done a little bit qualitative. Version 1 was not as, didn't quite use statistical optimization to get these distributions to be perfect. So that's something we definitely want to do moving forward. But we were really happy with the way it came out. This is just an example from the Rocky Mountains to get an idea for how this was tuned to current condition risk. That leaves fire timing. So not only do fires not occur everywhere, they also don't occur all the time. We need fires to be simulated when they're most likely to occur. And we did that by limiting fires to only occur at the 60th percentile or higher of the energy release component in a given location. So we calculate the distribution of energy release component for the year, estimate the 60th percentile, and it has to be at least that high or higher to start a fire. And that just forces all the fires to be in a more probable window of when fires can occur. In some places, the distribution is quite unchanging compared to other places, so that widens the window of when fires can occur. In other places, the window is narrower and you're going to favor more summer fires, for example. And that energy release component is recalculated under different CMIP6 models, which widens the window in most places to allow for fires to occur more of the year, which is what we see historically, or what we see now under climate change conditions we're already observing. The energy release component is a weather-dependent variable. It approximates the energy release at the flaming front of a potential fire in a standardized fuel type. It's sort of dependent on fuel moisture estimates. In previous studies, it was found that the percentiles were strongly correlated to fire occurrence. So we used that to change this. This didn't quite capture the seasonality like it could have. And so again, this is another thing we're going to be refining moving forward, but we were happy with the results. And so we were able to move forward. The last thing I'll say about this is for timing. We also prevented fires from occurring when there was snow. So we used the historical snow cover maps in Canada and limited fires to only occur when there was no snow on the ground. And then we did a projection of snow cover into the future using an empirical correlation with air temperature that has been supported in the literature. And when we did that correlation, we were able to estimate sadly, a lot of snow loss in Canada and opening up the window to more of the year for fires to occur. And then again, we peppered in where fires could occur at a low level all year to allow for uncertainty as well into the future. That, just to pull this diagram up again, we've got ignition time and location, we've got fire max duration, and those can get fed into the meteorology, into simulating fires. And simulating fires relies on the static inputs, which are the fuel layers and the topography. Topography was just grabbed straight from available sources, so I won't talk about that. The fuels are the fun part. So this was this was the most challenging source of information for Canada. It's one of the most original sources of data in our model, and also probably the biggest source of uncertainty because the methods I've outlined so far were pretty straightforward, grabbed from standard approaches that have been used before. This was a truly original, bespoke product. Um, the this was took about a year to develop, which is pretty fast turnaround actually for developing a subcontinental scale fuel model at 30-meter resolution for all of Canada. That's really fast. So again, this is version one. We're going to be refining it. We were happy with the end result, but we want to build in as much ecology as we can. That was the goal of this product. And I did my very best to put as much ecological interpretation as I could into especially our fuel classifications, um, and the best possible underlying data available. So we developed we have these five data inputs: canopy height, canopy cover, canopy base height, which is the average height from the ground to the lowest point of a forest's main canopy. So related to canopy depth and tree height, both. And then canopy bulk density, which is the mass of material per unit volume in the canopy. And then the Scott and Bergen fuel models are a categorical input to Elm Fire, which I'll get into shortly. These were easy. Canopy cover and height, just sourced directly from the spatialized Canadian National Forest Inventory. These are National Forest Inventory plots that were spatialized, just like it says, to 30-meter resolution across Canada. It's a really powerful data set. You'll see me reference this more than once. And they provide more than just canopy cover and height. So it was used in a lot of different ways in this in the fuel development. Yeah, so these were straightforward. Canopy base height was modeled using random forest. Um, Canopy base height is available as a variable from the National Forest Inventory ground plots across Canada, which allowed us to use the same, they provide the same inputs as ScanFi. We have ground plot data and ScanFi data that are both available from those two independent sources, which let us train the model on the ground plots and then extrapolate using or interpolate using ScanFi. So ScanFi provided above ground biomass, canopy height, dominant tree species, and density class, which is separated into three categories. And it's not a lot of information to model canopy base height. It's a difficult thing to model. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. But we got an R-squared value of 0.65, which is really much better than I expected it to be. Um, and so we were really happy with this. This turned out great, and didn't have to fiddle with it much more. Obviously, we're going to be looking at this again and trying to get even better. This is a variable that factors strongly into fire behavior because if the canopy base height is very high, you're much less likely to have a crown fire in the simulation. And so this does have relevance for a lot of different places in Canada and is a really important one. So we're going to be revisiting it, but really happy with the first iteration. Canopy bulk density is our last continuous variable that we modeled. This was based on foliar biomass, and foliar biomass is not typically the only thing in canopy base height when it comes to using it for fire. You should have small branchlet mass as well included, but those data are not available for Canada. So we used foliar biomass, which has been done in previous studies to get canopy base height, canopy bulk density. Um, and just downscaled it from the National Forest Inventory, in addition to ground plots, also has their own wall-to-wall maps that are lower resolution. And we just downscaled it using a model trained on ScanFi. And then from foliar biomass, we divide it by canopy depth because the foliar biomass is already per area. And just dividing by canopy depth gets us a mass per volume canopy bulk density. And there we have it. Okay, now for the fun stuff. This is our classification system. So these were first published by Scott and Berg in 2005. The values are used in Rothermel models of surface fire spread. And it's 40 fuel classes that are grouped into 7 main categories. The non-burnable classes are bare ground, water, ice and snow, agriculture, and urban. Then you have grasslands, you've got grass and shrub mixed lands, shrublands, and then timber litter is separated into timber litter with understory and without. And then the last one is slash blowdown. And we don't have any information on slash and blowdown. It's not a common fuel type on the landscape in the US, according to Landfire. And so we didn't expect it to have a huge influence across the board in Canada, but it's again something we could revisit. But at this point, we have no information on slash. Um, these major categories are then further separated into the 40 classes by the fuel loadings into 1 hour to 100-hour fuels, fine live fuel, and then dead fuel, things like that. Surface area volume ratio of the fuel, fuel bed depth, moisture of extinction, and heat release in each of these subcategories gets you the 40 classes total. And then the values, the numerical values, are what get fed into the fire spread models. These data are available from, oh, and there's also, sorry, there's also a climate component. So if it's a more of a dry fuel or a humid fuel is part of it as well. In the US, we have, amazingly, we have these available at 30-meter resolution in Alaska and in CONUS from Landfire, released every year. It's open source. It's Landfire produces maps for all different reasons. It's a multi-purpose product or program. So it's heavily vetted. There's lots of hands on it, and it's a world-class product that we couldn't hope to replicate, but we tried to get as close as possible we could. The great thing for us for this project was that it overlaps by 90 kilometers with Canada, which made for a great reference point, if a touch point. If we were ever uncertain about an interpretation, we could always look at Landfire, which is great, at least in the southern portion or the western portion of Canada. Yeah, and we definitely referred to Landfire throughout for checks and balances. And it was a great resource and something, if you haven't dug into, it's an awesome source of data if you ever need it. We don't have that in Canada, but we do have several really great data sets that are worth talking about up front. The Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System employs fire behavior prediction, FBP, which is their own Canadian fire model that has its own fuel types, but they're not as detailed as Elm Fire. There's a reason we used Elm Fire because it's got a lot more information about fire behavior in it. Can't be used directly, but it is built for purpose, built for fire. And so, and because it's a local data source, we wanted to leverage this as best as possible. So whenever possible, we weighted FBP over other sources of information. And I just wanted to throw up the fire history map we have for Canada from the National Burned Area Composite, which shows how fires tend to follow this mid-latitude, as I described before. All in here. All right. The second really great data set I want to talk about is the vegetation zones of Canada. It's similar to the EPA ecoregions where it separates vegetation by structure and species composition. That is stratified by the density of the canopy, topography, drainage, climate, understory distributions like shrub, grass, forb, reindeer lichen, and feather moss. These are worth talking about briefly. Having those in the understory descriptions is really, really important for fire behavior. Reindeer lichen and feather moss are really interesting fuels that only occur really up into northern latitudes. And so we don't have it well represented in the CONUS data set from Landfire. I don't know how much it's built into the Alaskan data sets. There's not a lot of information about how those were classified, but we definitely needed to factor these in for our fuel classifications. Reindeer lichen is a really dense material, and feather moss, both of them dry out and become highly flammable. They're not well modeled by any typical fire spread model. They're not usually part of any fuel classification system, and they behave really differently from any fuels that have been modeled explicitly because they're non-vascular in structure. So they don't have the same kind of moisture retention that other or sessile organisms do. Um, they're like feather moss is poikilohydric, if you're familiar with that term. So it's going to change moisture with the air, and that is going to affect the dry down period, how dry it gets, that kind of thing. And so the closest approximations we have is for reindeer lichen. It's most similar to shrub fuels. Actually, they get the depth of the lichen can actually be quite great, and has a lot of dense carbon in it in the structure, but it's a fluffy, airy material that ignites rapidly. It's been observed carrying fires. If it's just reindeer lichen on the ground, can carry a fire across a hill. And feather moss is most similar to grass. There was at least one study on that that showed feather moss is the closest approximation we have within FBM 40. And then, as I said, ecoregions are also separated by climate, and there's fire regime and fire recovery information, which is really helpful. So we use this across the board for interpretation. Okay, let's get into it. We first classified vegetation into major categories: forest, shrub, grass, and the non-burnable. This included FBP, it included the vegetation zones of Canada, but it also included some other data sources, some other classification systems in Canada, and each one of them got a vote. FPP got 2 votes and voted on what each pixel was, and the majority vote was taken with these in order if there was ever a tie. Once we had the major classes, we then delineated each vegetated class. Just forests, grasslands, and shrublands were delineated. These could go straight into our FM40 classification. Forests were delineated using ecological interpretation by tree species, canopy density, vegetation classifications, and pyroecological interpretation. And then grasslands and shrublands were modeled in the US. There's way less information about grasslands and shrublands, unfortunately, and so we did have to model it and extrapolate to Canada. And then once we had the 40 subclasses, that's just based on classification systems, which are static in nature almost all the time and don't consider recent disturbance. But recent disturbance has a huge impact on fuels, and so we have to modify our static layers with updates from recent fuels, recent disturbances. Then, because we're interested in structures, this is a map that's the intention is to model risk to structures in Canada as part of our mission at First Street. We needed fuels to burn structures, which they're classified as non-burnable. And so this is not intended to be an urban fire spread model, but what we were able to do was just tweak the fuels in the wildland urban interface and allow fires from the wildland to spread into non-burnable pixels in the WUI. And that just captured any impacts of fire spreading into that area. And I'll get into how this was done in a moment. So I'll start with grasslands and shrublands. Okay. So this was trained using land fire data. We took all of the grass types, let's just say grasses. We did this for grasses, grass shrubs and shrubs, but starting with the grasses, took observations of undisturbed grass pixels in land fire. So we're just looking with undisturbed vegetation and extrapolated all across Canada. And that gave us the potential grass growth all over. Obviously, grasses don't grow everywhere. We're going to merge that with our major vegetation classification layer to get the grasses out of there. But just to give us a potential growth of grasses across Canada, we used climatic zone, aridity index, and satellite-derived biomass estimates to get these an undisturbed grass layer. And we actually had pretty good success across the board, across GR, GS, and SH types, and found that this satisfied our purposes. There's obviously uncertainty And that is important. I don't want to underplay that. This is the first version of the data, so again, we're going to be refining it. But when we looked at fire behavior, we did not find that we had evidence that these layers were causing errors in the resulting burn probability results. So we didn't dig any further. I mean, it's like three predictors. We could do better, and so we're definitely going to do better next time. But the fact that we got so close to the answer using test data in the US showed us that we're doing pretty well just with these predictors to start with. So I was really happy with the results in this one. One big update I want to do moving forward is to dig into small published data sets and more small observations across Canada and build up a database we have to vet our predictions in Canada to get a little more of the local knowledge built in. So I'm definitely going to push for that for the next version. All right, so those are our subclass models. You'll notice from the previous classifications that I mentioned, the major types that we did was just forests, grasslands, and shrublands. And we're missing the separation of timber litter with understory and without understory, and we're also missing our grass shrub component. Grass shrub and shrub were split from our major class of shrublands, and that's because none of the underlying vegetation data sets had a grass shrub. And we expect that the larger component being shrubs, be just physically larger, is going to be what it has to split from. So we're going to take ecological interpretation to separate grass shrubs from shrublands, and we're going to use ecological interpretation for forest delineations. And that's forests just have so much more information in them. We could actually go straight from descriptions and zone-based classification, which is what we did. So we built these decision trees for each ecological zone and also looked at fire history in addition to descriptions and field observations and every published data set we could to get this tree separated out. We looked at our fire history as well just to see, just check our notes. Um, and I'm going to give you an example using the Eastern Boreal Forest. So I'm going to read you a description we used to classify this. They're described as having closed forests that dominate most upland sites, although open forests and woodlands are commonly associated with very dry sites or repeated severe disturbances. Forest canopies can be dominated by evergreen conifers, broadleafs, or a mixture. Understory structure varies from dense to sparse and is dominated by shrubs and bryophytes. So bryophytes end up being feather moss, which previous studies have found have really occur under dense canopies of conifers. Oh, look at that. A continuous feather moss ground layer is characteristic of forests, especially under conifer canopies. Climate is mostly humid, so we're going to want to favor the more humid fuels. Maritime climates on the coast characterized by persistent fog and clouds. Frequent stand replacing fires form a mosaic with fire return interval based on aridity gradient. So that's going to tell us how the fuel loadings distribute across the landscape. And then after burns, forests are even aged with simple structure. After prolonged lack of fire, forests are multi-storied. We're going to factor that into our disturbances. And then upland, grasslands, and shrublands are rare on the landscape other than immediately following forest removal and on very dry or shallow sites. It doesn't really tell us if there's a grass component under the shrubs. I'm going to put that under shrubs. Wherever the shrublands are, I'm going to go SH. But that's going to have an asterisk next to it saying we really need more information on this vegetation type and see if we have any more details. This is straight from the vegetation zones of Canada description, and we have other sources we can look at. Okay, now there's a really interesting fuel type in FM40. After we separated the shrublands, we're going to look at the forests, and we want to make sure we capture the dwarf conifer with understory as a really unique fuel type. So we're going to pull that out first. That's we pretty much always do that in Canada. And then all other forests, we separate between closed and open. And the open canopy is going to support more of a shrub fuel because of more light penetrating the understory. It's also going to occur at drier sites according to the description. So we're going to go with TU5, very high load, dry climate timber shrub. Okay, closed canopy, we're going to separate into conifer dominated. Remember, conifers, if it's closed canopy, is going to support feather moss. So we look for a grass component in the fuel description. And the closest one we have is moderate load, humid climate, timber grass shrub. And that leaves the mixed or broadleaf dominated closed canopy. And for this, we know that there's not going to be a feather moss component, most likely. We're not going to have a lot of understory because a dense broadleaf community is going to shade the understory quite significantly. So we're going to call that broadleaf litter dominated, moderate load broadleaf litter. And I wouldn't necessarily know how much broadleaf litter to consider here, except that this is close enough to the US that we can look at land fire and see what was classified in those closed broadleaf communities. And that just gives you an idea of how this is teased apart. And obviously we're going to check it as many times in as many places as possible and vet this tree before we move forward. Okay, one exception I have to mention. Because of reindeer lichen, we're not going to use the regular system with spruce lichen woodland. This is a really cool, well, to me it's cool, really unique vegetation type that we don't encounter in Conus. It does occur in Alaska. I'm not 100% sure how much this is considered in the FM40 class for Alaska from Landfire. I hope that they've considered it. I couldn't find any information on it. But this is a vegetation type that's dominated by dwarf black spruce, and the trees are quite separated on the ground. It's a really open canopy, and the branches go all the way to the ground, which means that when a fire approaches one of these trees, it can elevate into the canopy of the tree, the quite easily into the crown of the tree. Um, However, they're separated a lot on the ground. So there's your vertical fuel continuity, definitely there. And then it has an understory of continuous mat of reindeer lichen, which is highly flammable when dry and carries like a shrub fuel. And there's your horizontal fuel continuity. So this is one of the big reasons I think, I suspect, that mid latitude in Canada carries so many fires. This is part of it, is that this tends to be where the vegetation type is distributed, is across that mid latitude. And so Robert Ziel did a study on this to see what was the closest analogy fuel to the FM40 system between this is C1 is I should have mentioned is from FBP in Canada. So he looked at this and found that it was most similar to the shrub level 5 fuel, which is a really hazardous high fuel load and pretty dangerous when it ignites. And we can just take directly from FBP, wherever it was classified as C1, and put it in SH5. And so we did that without the consideration of a decision tree. We just go straight into that one. It was the only one we were able to translate directly from FBP. All right, that's our static system. That's all the fuels we know as unchanged. That's our potential fuel, basically. And then we're going to put disturbances right on top. Landfire uses a slightly different system from us. We couldn't quite replicate what they have done. They have rule sets for disturbance that are zone specific, and these zones don't extend to Canada. We can't translate them. So what we did was take the zones that border Canada, assuming that something that's more spatially similar is going to be more ecologically similar. It's not a perfect way to do it, but it was fast, and we felt we could justify it using both Canada and Alaska and CONUS. We took the FM40 classes, looked at what disturbance occurred there and how land fire transitioned post-disturbance. And whatever was the most common disturbance, along with some common sense and some deep reading, determined what the most likely transition was from one FM40 after disturbance to post-disturbance. And one thing that we really wanted to factor in was the feather moss and reindeer lichen. So feather moss takes about 15 years to recover after fire on average. And so and reindeer lichen takes 30. And so we extended our disturbance consideration going back 30 years. Landfire only does 10. But in order to get this really slow growing recovery captured, we did back to 30 years adjustment in any vegetation type that was classified as having an understory based on the feather moss and the reindeer lichen, which includes the grass shrub, which could be shrub with feather moss underneath. And then we also had really interesting post-logging observations in some vegetation types that were from Canadian sources that we were able to incorporate as well in our disturbance modification. So we took our static classification and modified it with disturbances. And then the last part was the WUI fuels. So the wildland urban interface fuels is incredibly important for predicting impact to structures, which is ultimately what we're interested in. We need these wildland fires to spread into the WUI and burn this quote unquote like non-burnable pixels. And so, even though we're not trying to do an urban fire spread model, we were able to capture this decently well based on things we saw from our US model. What we did was take any pixel that was classified as bare ground, agriculture, or urban and made it a burnable pixel. And didn't do that for water and snow and ice because that's not going to change, even if it's the WUI. And then didn't allow ignitions in the WUI. We masked that out of our ignition density map because we expect the WUI to be heavily monitored for fires and suppression is going to be fast. So we just excluded those from igniting, but we allow the wildland fires to spread in. Um, this actually worked quite well to capture fire behavior. For example, we looked at the Palisades and Eaton's fires that happened just over a year ago, big catastrophic fires. And we found that 94% of the affected structures were classed by our system as severe or extreme fire risk. And that's our ultimate goal is to get at the likelihood of fire. This adjustment that we do to burnable, we use the grass shrub component grass shrub one fuel. And even though that's a really really simple, just, a replacement for pixels, um, it does show fire spread and it won't capture flame length or fire intensity. That's another question. Our main product is burn probability. For flame length and fire intensity is going to be more important if we end up adding a loss prediction for houses, something like that. And if we did that, we would want to dig into this further. But for our purposes, it worked quite well in the fires we've observed so far. All right, so that's it. We did static fuels. We did our continuous layers and our fuel classification system. We did our sort of potential fire, and then we adjusted it with the disturbances, and then we did this quick WUI modification, and this is our FM40 class. Ooh. All right. And then of course we did 50,000 years of potential fire years. We simulated millions of fires and found really good agreement with our US product. And we're really happy with how this turned out. We are a for-profit company. We have customers in lots of sectors. We have individuals who use our data through Zillow to look for fire risk of their housing, along with our other models. We have governments and banks and investors and asset managers, and all of them are interested in what the risk is to housing now and other structures now, and also what the risk is under climate change, under different scenarios. We need to know this information because it's at this point just buyer beware. And the more information we have, the better we'll be at building safely and buying safely. I do want to throw up our future maps. And on the scale, it's really hard to tell. I wish I had gotten something zoomed in a little further so you can see. If you sort of squint, you can see the difference. Basically, fire risk is higher. I will say you can see the change most significantly in 75 years from now, SSV 585. We get some growth of the high risk areas into the surrounding zones. It pops out a lot more when you zoom in. Next time I'll do that. Okay. I want to thank a lot of contributors for, as I said, it was a group effort for sure. Pyrogens led the way in the US and we took cues from them. We had collaborators Phil Cunningham, Wade Ross, Brian Zambri, Mike Amadeo, Ed Kearns, and Marco Mineta all contributed to this product. And I hope that you'll look for the publication that we're going to be putting out on our methods.